Hi and welcome, I'm Andy Miuch and you are watching A News. Here are the headlines. Donald Trump says that a Gaza ceasefire and hostages deal can be reached within a week as Benjamin Netanyahu visits Washington. Russian forces launch another large-scale drone attack on Ukraine, hitting several cities. Texas floods death toll continues to rise with dozens confirmed dead. Thank you for tuning in. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is in Washington for talks with US President Donald Trump amid the indirect negotiations between Israel and Hamas on a Gaza ceasefire and hostages deal. Trump had said over the weekend that a deal might be reached within a week. Our Odesa brings more from Washington.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is in Washington to meet with President Trump, where he's expected to discuss the Gaza war and the ongoing negotiations with Hamas to release the remaining live Israeli hostages, as well as to negotiate the release of the bodies of deceased hostages who have been held by militants since the October 7th attacks in 2023. Officials in Washington say that President Trump is keen to reach an agreement with Prime Minister Netanyahu on the terms for ending the Gaza conflict. The White House wants to capitalize on the ongoing ceasefire between Israel and Iran and the recent momentum in negotiations between Israel and Hamas that could lead to the release of hostages in exchange for a 60-day truce. Hamas-led militants killed around 1,200 people, mostly civilians, and took around 250 hostages in a war that has led to massive devastation in Gaza. Indirect talks in Qatar between Israel and Hamas are ongoing, but they've yet to conclude in a ceasefire deal. Netanyahu said before departing Israel that his meeting with Trump could help get a deal across the line. And Trump told reporters on Sunday that he thinks a deal could be reached this week. A big issue of concern for the White House is the so-called day after scenario and who will govern Gaza without Hamas. Trump's Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff previously met with Netanyahu's senior advisor Ron Dermer specifically to discuss this issue. Israel has reportedly softened its position on the need to send senior Hamas officials into exile as part of a deal to end the war in Gaza. And according to fresh reports here in Washington, the Israeli government may now be willing to settle for the expulsion of a few top military commanders. And one Israeli official told Axios that Israel will demand the dismantling of Hamas's military wing and is willing to consider granting amnesty for hundreds of militants if they lay down their weapons. Israeli forces have killed most of Hamas's senior military commanders, and there is also the possibility of a limited amnesty. Syria is another point of discussion between the U.S. and Israel, with the U.S. envoy to Syria and close confidant for President Trump, Tom Barak, recently stating that the talks between Syria and Israel have begun and that an agreement could be close with the new Syrian government. Odesa for A News, Washington, D.C.
At least 4 people have been killed and dozens more injured after Russian drone attacks hit several Ukrainian cities overnight.
Russian forces launched a large-scale drone attack on Ukraine overnight, hitting several cities. Authorities say the strikes caused casualties and widespread damage to civilian infrastructure. In Khrakiv, dozens were injured, including 4 children, after drones hit residential areas in 3 districts.
I was having breakfast at the time. Then I heard it flying. I woke my wife and goddaughter up and took them to the bathroom. I stood behind the partition wall, and then there was an explosion. Glass shattered, and the windows were blown off. Then there was another one.
My husband got some cuts from the broken glass, but it wasn't serious because we managed to run to the bathroom. My mother was first hit by the falling carpet, then by the debris.
According to the city's mayor and the regional military administration, a kindergarten and multiple apartment buildings were damaged, and several victims remain in hospital. In the southern port city of Odesa, 1 person was killed. Local reports say car service stations and parked vehicles were also damaged. The capital Kyiv was also targeted. Although no one was injured, falling drone debris sparked fires and cut off hot water to around 500 buildings, including schools and hospitals. Further north, in the Sumy region, Russian shelling killed 2 people and injured 2 others. Emergency services reported that the attack damaged around 20 buildings and set several homes on fire. In Kherson, another civilian was killed after drone-guided shelling hit the city center. Rescuers were forced to pause firefighting efforts several times due to ongoing attacks in the area. Ukraine's Air Force said Russia launched over 100 drones and several guided missiles from the Kursk region, with 75 drones successfully intercepted.
The U.S. is preparing to impose sweeping tariff hikes starting August as Donald Trump pushes to finalize dozens of trade deals before a July 9th deadline. Meanwhile, Trump announced that the tariff rate for Japan and South Korea will stand at 25%, citing trade imbalances.
President Donald Trump is giving trade partners until July 9th to reach agreements or face new US tariffs as high as 50%, with implementation set for August 1st. Only 2 deals with the UK and Vietnam have been finalised so far.
They're going to be tariffs, the tariffs are going to be the tariffs. I think we'll have most countries done by July 9th, yeah. Either a letter or a deal.
Over the weekend, Trump made clear that tariffs will be applied broadly. He threatened additional 10% tariffs on BRICS-aligned countries, just as the bloc held its summit in Brazil. China responded to Trump's warning.
We believe that BRICS is a positive force in the international community. Its cooperation is open and inclusive, and not targeted at any particular country. As for tariffs, we have consistently opposed tariff wars and trade wars. We are against using tariffs as a tool for coercion and pressure.
Among major players, the European Union is pushing to avoid a 17% tariff on agriculture and wants exemptions for pharmaceuticals and semiconductors. Brussels has offered to accept a flat 10% tariff if sector-specific duties are dropped.
Progress has been made towards an agreement in principle. We consulted with our member states on Friday. Our president talked to the American president yesterday, and we are working hard, all parts of the machine, towards getting something over the line by the 9th of July.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says several trade announcements are expected within 48 hours, citing a last-minute flood of proposals. Markets are cautious. Wall Street is bracing for a lower open Monday, with tariff tensions and weak investor sentiment driving uncertainty ahead of the July 9th deadline.
Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has called on BRICS leaders to lead global reforms during the group's summit in Rio de Janeiro.
Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has urged BRICS leaders to take the lead on global reforms during the summit in Rio de Janeiro. Speaking at a session titled Strengthening Multilateralism, Economic Financial Affairs and Artificial Intelligence, Lula said, "The international landscape has worsened, undermining the decisions made during last year's G20 summit." He called on BRICS leaders to build on their past contributions and push for structural change.
It is the same location that hosted the G20 summit last year. Much of the success achieved was due to the constructive participation of the BRICS. To reflect our economic weight, the BRICS members' voting power at the IMF should amount to at least 25%, not the 18% we currently hold. Where the post-war arrangements continue to fall short, the new development bank offers a lesson in governance.
The expansion of BRICS has created new opportunities for diplomatic coordination. More than 30 countries have expressed interest in joining the group, either as full members or partners. The bloc, originally formed in 2009 with Brazil, Russia, India and China, later welcomed South Africa. Last year, BRICS expanded further to include Egypt, Ethiopia, Indonesia, Iran, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates.
Oil markets reacted to a surprise decision by the OPEC Plus to boost production in August, pushing prices lower. The global energy markets are also watching the United States, where new trade agreements and higher tariffs are expected soon.
Oil prices declined by more than 1% on Monday following OPEC Plus's unexpected decision to increase output in August, sparking concerns over a potential oversupply. Brent crude slipped 1.2%, losing 80 cents to settle at $67.50 a barrel, while US West Texas Intermediate fell 2%, down $1.32 to $65.68. The 548,000 barrel per day production hike exceeds previous monthly increases, highlighting intensive competition among oil producers. OPEC Plus pointed to steady global economic conditions and low inventories as justification for the move. In a show of confidence, Saudi Arabia raised prices for its Arab light crude in Asia. Analysts anticipate a further rise in output when OPEC Plus meets again in September. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump says the US is close to finalizing several trade pacts on several trade agreements soon, ahead of the 9th of July deadline to introduce higher tariffs, which he says will now take effect from the 1st of August.
Catastrophic flash floods have claimed at least 82 lives in central Texas, including 28 children, after torrential rains triggered a rapid rise in water levels. As rescue crews continue searching for the missing, devastated communities are left grappling with one of the deadliest flood events in recent memory.
Central Texas is reeling after devastating flash floods swept through the region over the weekend, killing at least 82 people, including 28 children. Torrential rains triggered a sudden rise of up to 800 centimeters along the Guadalupe River, causing widespread destruction in Kerr County and surrounding areas. The worst-hit area, Kerr County, reported 68 deaths, while others were confirmed across Travis, Burnett, Kendall, Williamson, and Tom Green counties. Search and rescue operations are ongoing, with several children still missing from Camp Mystic, a girls' summer camp that was directly in the path of the floods. Camp Mystic's owner died during rescue efforts, and 4 campers have been confirmed dead. Emergency crews, both air and ground, have been working continuously to locate survivors and recover bodies amid difficult conditions.
We were focused where we found the husband, Mr. Jose Olvera, thinking because they were holding hands when they got washed away. And we focused there and trying to get as closest to the body as we could, but we just started kind of going that way.
The father was found yesterday. The team found 2 kids too, downstream, and so we're just scouting the area, both sides of the riverbed. Found an article of clothing from the mother, and we were tracking and tracing opposite sides of the riverbed.
Officials are now reviewing the region's emergency alert systems after concerns were raised about how warnings were issued. Although the National Weather Service had flagged the flooding risk early Friday, it remains unclear how widely those alerts were received. Rain continues to fall in the already flooded region, prompting further flood warnings as rivers and creeks begin to rise again. A major disaster declaration has been signed for Kerr County, allowing for the release of federal aid and resources to support ongoing rescue and recovery operations.
Time now to hear from our Anita Sharma, bringing us the latest on the key developments shaping the European continent.
Hello and welcome to This Day in Europe. Let's round up key developments shaping the continent. From rising political and climate temperatures to history-making swims, here's what's making news across the European Union and beyond. Border tensions are escalating between Poland and Germany. Today, Poland reinstates temporary border checks with Germany and Lithuania. The move is in response to Germany's decision to turn back migrants at its eastern border, a step that Warsaw argues violates EU asylum law. The German chancellor defends a stricter border policy as necessary to stop illegal entries and reduce pressure on domestic services. But critics argue it undermines the EU's principle of open internal borders enshrined in the Schengen Agreement. The Polish Prime Minister says Germany's actions are unacceptable and claims they push the burden of migration enforcement onto Poland. Donald Tusk also blames Belarus for funneling migrants toward EU borders. Meantime, the European Commission now warns of a deeper crisis in Schengen if member states continue to bypass Brussels and impose unilateral controls. With migration still one of the continent's most divisive issues, tensions like these could have long-term consequences for both EU cohesion and human rights. Tariffs are also taking center stage, with the clock ticking on one of the most consequential trade standoffs in recent European history. By tomorrow, the U.S. is set to raise tariffs on EU exports up to 50% unless a last-minute deal is reached in Washington. The looming measures stem from President Trump's so-called Liberation Day tariffs, which introduced blanket import duties back in April. A temporary freeze capping tariffs at 10% was granted to key allies like the EU, but that grace period is now coming to an end. Germany, deeply dependent on exports, wants a quick deal, similar to what the UK already secured, to shield its industrial base. France and several southern nations, however, warn against what they call a rushed settlement, arguing it could surrender long-term leverage on digital rules, green subsidies, and food safety standards. The Trade Commissioner is trying to thread the needle here, offering a framework agreement to avoid the tariff hike while leaving space to negotiate the details later this year. Economists warn that full tariffs could shave 0.5% off EU GDP and force exporters, especially in sectors like wine, medical devices, and car parts, to rethink their supply chains altogether. Now, some key scenarios could play out. If the framework deal is agreed upon, Trump's tariffs remain at about 10% and the EU avoids the worst-case impact, while detailed negotiations continue. Now, if there is no deal and no extension, tariffs could escalate to as high as 50% on EU exports, likely triggering reciprocal EU measures and more severe market gyrations. Let's look at another scenario as well. A partial or delayed deadline, with letters circulating to warn partners. If no agreement is reached by tomorrow, the EU is prepared to respond with retaliatory tariffs worth 21 billion euros, with more on the table. Bottom line, what's decided or not this week could define the future of transatlantic trade for years to come. Also on the diplomatic agenda, the 37th Franco-British Summit. French President Emmanuel Macron will meet with newly elected British Prime Minister Keir Starmer this week to discuss a range of issues: defense cooperation, trade alignment, and notably, the post-Brexit future of UK-EU relations. With the rise of regional instability and waning American engagement in European affairs, both leaders are expected to recommit to joint security projects, including nuclear deterrence agreements and joint naval exercises. All this as Macron faces political instability at home. His party is reeling from poor European election results, and far-right leader Jordan Bardella continues to gain ground. In the UK, Starmer is also under pressure to show that Labour's return to power includes a strong foreign policy agenda. Turning to climate concerns now, Greece faces yet another wave of devastating wildfires fueled by high winds, soaring temperatures. Emergency crews are deployed across the mainland and the islands of Rhodes and Crete. Thousands are evacuated and several flights are canceled due to smoke and poor visibility. Similar conditions are spreading to parts of Italy and Spain, where droughts and record heat are putting pressure on agriculture and electricity grids. Turkey is also suffering from wildfires in the eastern province of Izmir. As global temperatures continue to rise, the continent experiences extreme heat for far longer than the traditional summer months. These fires are yet another reminder that climate adaptation plans for the Mediterranean and Germany can no longer wait. As urban areas reclaim rivers for swimming, rural regions battle the rising cost of survival. This comes on the heels of the European Commission and the European Investment Bank announcing over 3.6 billion euros in fresh infrastructure and green energy projects. The funding will support rail upgrades in Italy, port modernization in Greece, and new hydrogen energy corridors in Germany and Austria. These projects are part of the EU's twin transitions, climate neutrality and digital innovation. Alongside this, the Commission unveiled its Quantum Europe 2030 initiative, aiming to make the bloc a world leader in quantum computing. The strategy includes research funding, education programs, and industrial partnerships, especially in France, the Netherlands, and Finland. EU officials say the goal is clear: to future-proof the European economy and reduce reliance on Chinese and American tech giants. Finally, after more than a century, the River Seine in Paris is now open for swimming. The French capital officially opened 3 public swimming zones along the historic waterway near the Eiffel Tower. River bathing was banned in 1923 due to severe pollution and river traffic. But now, a €1.4 billion investment, partly tied to last year's Paris Olympic Games, has helped facilitate the return of clean water. The city installed water treatment systems, separated storm drains from sewage, and improved runoff management. Swimming is free and open throughout the summer, a welcome turn as the continent adapts to increasingly hot summers. Well, that's this day in Europe. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands. Back to Baku.
France is facing new backlash over its overseas policies, with critics accusing Paris of modern-day colonialism, this time in the Indian Ocean.
Ignoring repeated calls from the UN and the global community, France continues to hold on to islands off Madagascar's coast, maintaining control over valuable resources and strategic sea routes. When Madagascar gained independence in 1960, France kept control of a nearby archipelago rich in hydrocarbons, declaring it an overseas territory despite opposition from the United Nations. The Apasses Islands, seized by France just before Madagascar's independence, remain a major point of dispute between Antananarivo and Paris. Their strategic location and valuable hydrocarbon resources are the main reasons France holds onto them. Today, French forces patrol the islands, which are administered by France's Overseas Territories Ministry. While France claims the islands are part of its exclusive economic zone, critics say this is a move to control vital sea routes and exploit offshore hydrocarbon reserves. Although France's mainland is relatively small, its total territory more than doubles when overseas holdings are included. Madagascar's President Andry Rajoelina has described the Apasses as part of the country's national identity. Locals and officials accuse France of exploiting the island's resources and blocking Madagascar's full sovereignty. The United Nations supported Madagascar's claim in 1976 and adopted non-binding resolutions in 1979 and 1980, urging France to negotiate the return of the islands. But after 45 years, no progress has been made. In the 1960s, France conducted nuclear tests in its overseas territories in the Pacific, highlighting a disregard for environmental and human impacts. While the Apasses Islands themselves were not used for testing, the archipelago, including the Glorioso Islands, has remained a source of ongoing tension between France and Madagascar. Talks between the two countries resumed in 2019, but failed to reach a breakthrough. In 2025, Presidents Macron and Rajoelina held a second round of discussions with no agreements at the end. Madagascar presented clear demands: compensation for economic losses, unrestricted fishing rights, and involvement in scientific research on the islands. France has yet to respond. Meanwhile, Baku has taken an active role in the global decolonization movement. The Baku Initiative Group has hosted conferences on Guadeloupe and supported other territories still under French control. As more nations call for justice and recognition, many say it's time for Paris to let go of its colonial past and respect the sovereignty of those it once ruled.
12 Turkish soldiers died after being exposed to methane gas during a search operation in a cave in northern Iraq, the defense ministry said. In a statement, the ministry said the incident took place on Sunday during a mission to locate the remains of a Turkish soldier killed during a military operation against the outlawed Kurdistan Workers' Party. Other soldiers also exposed to the gas in the cave have been taken to the hospital for treatment. Tajikistan has expressed readiness to join the China-Kyrgyzstan-Uzbekistan railway project at a ministerial meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Our Fariza Kalimurzina has the details.
Tajikistan has expressed its readiness to join the China-Kyrgyzstan-Uzbekistan railway project. This topic was discussed during the 12th meeting of transport ministers from the Shanghai Cooperation Organization member states, where Tajikistan's Minister of Transport held a bilateral meeting with his Chinese counterpart. The parties also explored opportunities to expand the multimodal corridor connecting China, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Iran, and Turkey. According to Dushanbe, this corridor could significantly reduce distances and transportation costs compared to existing routes. Another topic on the agenda was a Chinese-supported initiative to open an electric vehicle service center in Dushanbe. However, details regarding the project's timing and location remain undisclosed. Additionally, Tajikistan proposed increasing the number of licenses for international road transport, highlighting the growing volume of trade and freight traffic between the two nations. Experts note that Tajikistan's interest in this project stems largely from its geographic isolation and limited access to international transport routes. Currently, the country heavily relies on infrastructure in neighboring states, primarily Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and Russia. Participation in the China-Kyrgyzstan-Uzbekistan project offers Tajikistan a chance to join a promising southern transport corridor, providing access to China, the Persian Gulf, Turkey, and Europe, while bypassing northern routes. Additionally, the railway is expected to diversify trade opportunities. In 2023, trade turnover between Tajikistan and China exceeded $1.5 billion, with Chinese imports accounting for over 80%. Developing railway logistics will enable Tajikistan to boost exports, particularly in mineral resources, aluminum, textiles, and agricultural products. Economists also emphasize that joining this project could provide Tajikistan with transit revenue. The launch of this new railway line will support the creation of logistics hubs and warehousing terminals across the country, with potential key junctions in Dushanbe, Kujant, and Nurek. Fariza Kalimurzana, A News, in Almaty, Kazakhstan.
Georgia is doubling down on its ambition to become a vital bridge between East and West. The country's prime minister says strategic partnerships and infrastructure investments will play a key role in unlocking Georgia's economic potential. Our Nini Nikolaishvili has more in Tbilisi.
Georgia will do everything to strengthen its role as a key bridge between East and West. That's how Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze framed the country's growing ambitions. He highlighted the importance of balanced economic cooperation, not only with China, but also with Europe and the United States, positioning Georgia as a vital regional connector in global trade. The Prime Minister said that the large-scale investments are already being made in strategic infrastructure, including roads, railways, ports, and airports, with the goal of maximizing Georgia's connectivity functions. According to him, Georgia currently connects 7 landlocked states to the sea and to Europe, a role that the government now aims to expand even further. This is not the first time that Tbilisi promotes Georgia's potential as transport and logistics hubs. In recent years, the government signed multiple agreements with Chinese counterparts under the Belt and Road initiatives, while also securing youth funding for key corridors like East-West Highway and the Black Sea submarine cables. Obakhita insists that the focus now is on deepening cooperation on all fronts, east and west, to ensure that Georgia becomes not just a transport country, but also critical economic partner in the heart of Eurasia. It's Nini Nikolaishvili reporting from Tbilisi, A News.
The UN is sounding the alarm over a growing humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, as more than 1.4 million people, most of them returnees from Iran and Pakistan, have poured into the country in just the first half of 2025. Tamim Bahis is in Kabul with more.
According to the UN Refugee Agency, the sheer scale and speed of these returns are overwhelming aid efforts. UNHCR's representative in Afghanistan, Arafat Jamal, says the support system is on the brink of collapse as funding falls short and daily arrivals continue to rise. Iran has seen the largest surge, particularly after June 13. On July 1st alone, over 43,000 Afghans returned from Iran, nearly 9 times the daily average earlier this year. In Pakistan, similar trends have emerged, with over 150,000 people returning in April amid crackdowns and looming deportation deadlines. The UN says many of these returns are happening under coercive conditions, raising serious concerns about safety and dignity. Emergency teams have been dispatched to key border points like Islam Kala in Herat, providing hot meals, emergency cash, and essential supplies. But officials warn that without immediate funding, these life-saving operations could grind to a halt within weeks. So far, only 28% of the needed $216 million has been raised. This crisis comes on the heels of harsh refugee policies by neighboring countries. In 2023, Pakistan began expelling over 1 million undocumented Afghans, many fleeing Taliban persecution. Human Rights Watch says deportation often target women, children, and high-risk individuals. As the pressure mounts, the UN is urging the international community to act quickly before this growing emergency turns into a full-blown catastrophe. This is Tamim Bahis in Kabul for A News.
Airports across Iran have opened over the weekend, and many residents of the capital that fled the Israeli strikes have returned home. Day-to-day life after the 12-day war seems to be returning to normal. Artura Shiralilu has the details in Tehran.
As a sign of gradual normalization of post-war conditions, Tehran's Mehrabad Airport and the International Imam Khomeini Airport, as well as other major airports across the country, resumed their operations over the weekend, while more embassies are announcing return of their staff to their diplomatic missions in Tehran. The Civil Aviation Authority has put a time limit for the flights from 5 a.m. to 18 p.m., which indicates Iran does not want to risk its airspace security in the wake of U.S.-Israeli strikes, which were predominantly airborne. Schools and universities are already closed for long summer holidays, which run up to late September, with academic examinations postponed from July to August. Also, the country's health network, which underwent war conditions and was also attacked in a number of occasions by Israel, has stepped out of the state of emergency, as official figures put the number of death toll at 935 during 12 days of war. In the meantime, Tehran's unofficial currency market, which saw the surging exchange rate of about 970,000 rials per $1, is plummeted to 920,000 rials per $1. And the stock market is experiencing its first signs of viability following a record plunge during the war. Many residents, especially Tehranis, who had evacuated the capital during Israel's attacks, have returned to their houses and jobs, while a fragile ceasefire is holding between Iran on one side and the US and Israel on the other. And despite of resumption of routine life patterns, there are signals of the post-ceasefire uncertainties about its future, as Iran and US have not agreed on the date and venue of their next round of negotiations so far. Turaj Shiralilu, reporting for A News TV, Tehran.
And in sports news, Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan have officially submitted a joint bid to host the 2027 FIFA Under-20 World Cup. If approved, it would mark the first FIFA tournament co-hosted by Central Asia and the South Caucasus. FIFA has launched the evaluation process, and officials say both nations are fully prepared to host the tournament with modern stadiums, professional organization capabilities, and passionate local support. Well, that's all we have for you for now. Thank you so much for joining us. Well, that's all we have for you for now. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned to A News.